How does one of the most remote, landlocked countries in Asia, carved by jungle and mountains, cut off from coastlines, carry a genetic legacy more diverse than most continents? Laos wasn't supposed to matter much to the story of humanity. Not in the textbooks. Not in the migration charts that traced our ancestors out of Africa, through the Middle East, across Central Asia. It was meant to be a stopover, a silence between empires. But then a skull surfaced. In 2009, in the shadows of Tam Paling cave in northern Laos, archaeologists uncovered a partial cranium and jawbone. At first, it seemed ordinary, until the dating results returned. Not 5,000, not 15,000, over 46,000 to 63,000 years old, older than any other modern human remains in all of mainland Southeast Asia, older than the earliest tools in the Yellow River Valley, older than any city ever built. And what's more, this skull didn't belong to a Neanderthal. It was Homo sapiens, us, but in a place we never expected them to be that early. It changed everything. That single fossil forced scientists to redraw the map of human migration, because it meant people reached this jungle-cloaked highland, not after building civilizations, but while the Ice Age still gripped the planet. And then came the DNA. Not just from ancient bones, but from modern Laotians. Inside their genes was something astonishing. They weren't simply Southeast Asians. They carried lineages that predated Austroasiatic farmers, predated Tikadai speakers, even predated Chinese dynasties. They held traces of Hoabinian ancestry, the ancient hunter-gatherers who lived in this region 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. But deeper still, in the blood of some mountain tribes, scientists found fragments of an even more elusive source, Denisovan DNA, the same archaic hominin whose bones were discovered in Siberia and later, in a child's tooth, buried in Cobra Cave, Laos. The connection was undeniable. Modern Laotians, especially among highland minorities like the Hmong and Khmu, carry small but telling amounts of Denisovan ancestry, associated with immune function, oxygen regulation, and cold resistance. What this means is staggering. Laotian DNA isn't just diverse. It's ancestral. It's archaic. It's a living fossil of human history, encoded in bloodlines that never left the jungle. This wasn't supposed to happen here. But one discovery, deep in a limestone cave, shattered everything we believed about human origins in Asia. And what the ancient hunter-gatherers left behind wasn't just tools or bones. It was a genetic trail that refuses to die. And that trail just might lead us back to a people long thought extinct. But what if they never really disappeared? Long before kingdoms were carved from stone, before languages named the rivers, there were hands. Hands that chipped flint into blades. Hands that left no written word, but shaped the bones of this land with every step. We call them the Hoabinian. But to the forest, they were simply the first. For thousands of years, they lived deep within what is now Laos, moving through jungle-covered ridges, hunting with stone tools so distinct, archaeologists gave them their own name. Tools that date back over 10,000 years, but some even older. The world knew little about them, until scientists began studying basal East Asian DNA, a branch so ancient, it split from other Asian lineages before China had a name. And then a match was found, not in fossils, but in the living people of Laos, especially the Khmu, a midland ethnic group who've called these high slopes home for generations. In their mitochondrial DNA, in their maternal bloodlines, we find echoes of these ancient hunter-gatherers. These weren't just ancestors in myth. They were a genetic foundation, the deep roots beneath the Thai, beneath the Mon, beneath the Lao. In a study analyzing 214 Laotian individuals, scientists discovered over 141 unique haplotypes, many belonging to macrohaplogroup M, commonly found in Southeast Asia's oldest populations. But the surprise wasn't just their presence, it was how many were unknown to science. Whole lineages, missing from global genetic databases, still surviving here. It's as if Laos had hidden a forgotten branch of the human family tree, untouched, undisturbed, remembered only in blood. The Hoabinian legacy runs silent now, but not gone. Buried in language, in forest rituals, in the shape of the land itself. They weren't warriors. They didn't build monuments. But they built something deeper, a genetic memory, passed like a secret from mother to daughter, generation to generation. And yet, even they may have arrived late, because what lies beneath their story, beneath the tools, the bones, the blood, was older than any of them. But they weren't alone, and they weren't the first. And now, we follow the footprints of a people so ancient, some question if they were even human. It began with a tooth. Small, weathered, still buried in the shadows of Cobra Cave. It didn't look like much. But when scientists tested it, they stopped breathing. The DNA didn't match modern humans. It didn't match Neanderthals either. It belonged to something else. Something that once walked these mountains. A cousin to us, but different. Denisovan. They were thought to live in cold Siberian plateaus, far from the tropics. Not in this humid, green labyrinth of Southeast Asia. But the jawbone and tooth in Laos, dated over 150,000 years old, told a different story. They weren't visitors. They were here. And somehow they're still here. Because traces of Denisovan DNA still live in the blood of modern Laotians, especially in hill tribes, the Hmong, the Khmu, the Aka, groups that stayed high in the mountains, isolated, cut off from lowland migrations. Their genomes carry tiny but powerful pieces of this ancient code. Genes that regulate oxygen. Genes that help fight disease. Genes that shouldn't be there. But they are. Just like in the Tibetan Plateau, where Denisovan variants help people survive high altitudes, some Laotian groups may carry similar adaptations. Not because they migrated, but because they never left. They evolved here. Not just surrounded by the mountains, shaped by them. The caves became wombs of memory. The forests, a cradle of old blood. No monuments, no ruins. But their ghosts are still inside us. Silent, invisible, but alive in every breath taken atop these peaks. It forces a new question. What parts of us don't come from us at all? What if survival itself is borrowed? But the most surprising influence on Laotian DNA came from the rivers, not the mountains. Because down in the lowlands, where the water runs wide and soft, another story was quietly forming. Not hidden in caves, but moving with the current. Because down in the lowlands, where the Nam meets the Mekong, where the soil is dark and the rain doesn't stop, a new kind of people began to appear. They didn't come with armies. They came with rice. Around 4,000 years ago, a wave of Austroasiatic-speaking farmers moved south from what is now southern China. They brought agriculture. They brought bronze tools, ceramic styles, and Neolithic technologies. But most importantly, they brought their DNA. And when they reached the jungle valleys of Laos, they didn't erase the people who were already here. They blended. The ancient Hoabinian hunter-gatherers, those who'd lived off forest and fire for millennia, intermarried with the incoming Austroasiatic settlers. And in that merging, something genetically unique began to form. Today, their descendants still walk the mountains. The Khmu, the Mon, and other Austroasiatic groups are among the oldest living genetic lineages in Laos. Genetic studies reveal this clearly. In one landmark mitochondrial DNA study of 214 individuals, over 66% carried unique haplotypes, most of them belonging to macrohaplogroup M, an ancestral line found in pre-Neolithic Southeast Asia. Even more shocking, some of these maternal lineages have no matches in global genetic databases. They are undocumented, unshared, untouched. In the Khmu, specific M7B1 and C7 haplogroups have been traced back over 10,000 years, indicating continuous occupation of the region long before the Thai, long before the kingdoms, long before Laos even had a name. And their language? Still Austroasiatic, still carrying words that predate writing itself. They weren't just early. They were foundational. The farmers became forest people. The settlers became memories. And their genes became a quiet rhythm in the blood of a nation. But up north, pressures were building. In the mountains of Yunnan, in the river gorges of Guangxi, other people were preparing to move. Faster, stronger, more unified. And they wouldn't just blend in. But then the Thai came. And with them came a new power, one that would redraw the future of Laos and rewrite the DNA map once again. They moved like water, fast, smooth, unrelenting, down from the mountains of Yunnan, across the rivers of Guangxi, riding waves of iron, rice, and ritual. The Taikadai migration, once whispered in Chinese records as barbarians of the south, didn't come as conquerors. They came as a tide. Between 2,000 and 1,000 years ago, they entered what would become Laos. Their language was tonal, their skin familiar, but their genes carried stories from a different world. Archaeologists call it demic diffusion, the slow movement of people, not just ideas. And it's visible in the bones, in the blood. The arrival of the Thai-speaking Lao Lum, the lowland majority today, didn't erase the ancient peoples already living in these valleys. Instead, it fused with them. Modern Lao DNA is the proof. Genetic modeling shows that Lao Lum populations carry high percentages of Thai ancestry, but also clear Austroasiatic signals, especially in maternal lineages. The fathers came from the north, but the mothers? They were already here, and the legend knew it first. The ancient story of Kunborum, the mythical ancestor of the Lao, Thai, and Shan, tells of a celestial king who sent his sons to rule over new lands. But hidden beneath the myth is a deeper truth. Lao didn't just descend from kings. They were born from intermarriage, from shared soil, from hybrid roots. Yet not all was equal. The lowland Lao Lum, who settled the fertile plains, became genetically homogeneous. Generation after generation, isolated by endogamy and river culture, they became a tight cluster in genetic studies. Meanwhile, the Midland Kamu and Highland Hmong kept their ancient diversity, lineages more varied, more ancestral, more distinct. So how did it happen? How did a single nation, no larger than a scratch on a map, hold so many separate histories in one bloodstream? But one question remains: how did so many lineages survive side by side? And to answer that, we have to go deeper. You don't just need a map, you need altitude. Because Laos, this small, landlocked country, isn't one people. It's three nations stacked on top of each other. At the bottom, along the riverbanks and fertile floodplains, you find the Lao Lum, the lowlanders. Above them, spread across misty mid-mountains, the Lao Theung, mostly Austroasiatic tribes like the Kamu. And higher still, where clouds kiss the earth, live the Lao Sung, highland groups like the Hmong, the Hoabinian, and the Aka. Three altitudes, three cultures, three genetic realities. Scientists call this an eco-geographic divide, but for the people living it, it's life. Each of these groups preserve their own DNA, their own language, their own traditions, not because of politics, but because of geography and marriage law. In the highlands, things get strange. Populations like the Hmong show signs of strong endogamy, marrying only within clans or subgroups. That kind of isolation doesn't just shape culture, it warps the genome. Genetic studies reveal founder effects when a small, isolated group carries rare gene variants that become amplified over time. One example, the APOE4 allele. In mainstream populations, it appears in about 15% of people, but in some Lao minority tribes, it's over 31%. This allele is linked to Alzheimer's risk and cardiovascular disease, but also, potentially, to survival traits under historical pressures. Why is it so high here? Because these mountain tribes stayed apart. Their daughters didn't leave. Their sons didn't mix. The DNA, like the dialects, became frozen in place. But it wasn't just endogamy. Cultural rituals, from ancestor worship to clan-specific taboo systems, reinforced who could marry whom, and when and why. And over generations, this carved genetic islands in a country smaller than Michigan. The Hmong and Hoabinian, in particular, show genomic signatures distinct from surrounding Southeast Asian groups, sharing closer affinities with Southern Chinese and Vietnamese, Hmong then with their own Lao neighbors. It's a genetic puzzle, stacked in layers of altitude, myth, and memory. But what about the lowlands, where all roads converged? Where traders, warriors, farmers, and kings all passed through? And where DNA wasn't frozen, but stirred like a storm? This is where the story of Laos takes a different turn. Because in the lowlands, especially around Vientiane, along the ancient spine of the Mekong River, genetic history doesn't rest. It moves. It shifts. It collides. Unlike the mountains, where isolation preserved rare haplogroups and ancestral lines, the lowlands were alive with exchange. Not conquest. Not erasure. But quiet absorption. G25 genetic modeling reveals something unexpected. Modern-day Laotian, who speak Taikadai languages and identify with Laolum culture, carry as much as 58% Austroasiatic ancestry. Let that sink in. More than half of their DNA comes not from the Thai migrants who arrived 1,000 years ago, but from older indigenous populations, the Khmu, the Mon, the Khmer. This isn't guesswork. Multiple mtDNA and Y-DNA studies, including those published in Frontiers in Genetics and Annals of Human Genetics, confirm lowland Laos is a genetic mosaic with deep Austroasiatic maternal lines paired with Taikadai paternal markers. Fathers from the north, mothers from the soil. But here's the twist. Laos, unlike neighboring Vietnam or Thailand, was never colonized by Han China, and that makes its genome distinct. Vietnamese populations show high frequencies of Han Chinese admixture. Central Thais show genetic impact from Indianized cultures, visible in both mitochondrial haplotypes and autosomal DNA. But Laos? Genomic surveys show minimal Han Chinese markers, low South Asian presence, and negligible European influence. Instead, Laos built its identity by layering within itself, not by being overwritten. That's why researchers describe Laos as a genetic crossroads without foreign footprints. A place where Thai, Mon, and Khmer threads didn't clash, they merged. Where DNA didn't flow outward, it deepened inward. But even in this carefully blended basin, there are anomalies. Unique lineages, undocumented haplotypes, genetic signatures that don't match anything nearby. Not Thai, not Austroasiatic, not even East Asian. But deep inside this melting pot, there are signatures no one expected. And what they point to breaks every migration map we've ever drawn. Because some of the most revealing markers in Laotian DNA aren't from ancient migrations. They come from disease. Not heritage through bloodlines, but heritage through survival. All across Laos, buried inside every ethnic group from Laolum to Khmu to Hmong, scientists have discovered something strange. An unusually high frequency of hemoglobin disorders. Not just one, several. Thalassemia, hemoglobin E, HB constant spring. For decades, they were seen as unfortunate accidents of inheritance. But now, thanks to studies like the 2018 Genomic Survey by the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Nagasaki, we understand they were adaptive, hard-coded responses to one of the oldest threats humans ever faced, malaria. In the lowlands of the Mekong, in the humid rice fields where the air itself hums with mosquitoes, carrying malaria wasn't rare. It was constant, relentless. And so, over thousands of years, the Laotian genome fought back. But not with weapons, with mutations. Carriers of hemoglobin E, now found in up to 30 to 40% of the Lao population, especially in central and southern regions, show a statistically significant resistance to Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest malaria parasite on Earth. And then there's the G6PD union allele, a mutation in an enzyme that weakens red blood cells. In ordinary conditions, it causes problems. But under malaria pressure, it helps destroy infected cells before the parasite can multiply. This gene is so critical, it's now used by researchers as a molecular timestamp, evidence that malaria didn't just visit Laos. It shaped it. These so-called diseases aren't defects. They're survival blueprints, evolutionary scars passed down like sacred stories. But even these adaptations, powerful as they are, only go back a few thousand years. A blink in deep time. There's still something older in the blood, something stranger, and one forgotten layer of DNA. Maybe the oldest of them all. Older than empires. Older than migration. Etched not in stone, but in the bloodstream of daughters. Because when scientists searched for that ancient signal, they didn't find it in the father's line. They found it in the mitochondria. The tiny code passed only from mother to child. And what they found in Laos shouldn't have been possible. In a study of just 214 people, researchers uncovered 141 unique mtDNA haplotypes. That's one of the highest levels of maternal diversity ever recorded anywhere on Earth. How? Because Laotian women have carried something in them, quietly, across time. Something untouched by conquest, unmoved by borders, and buried in that maternal line, were sequences the world had never seen. Entirely novel lineages, not found in China, not in India, not even in other parts of Southeast Asia. These weren't echoes of empire. They were ancestral roots, stretching back over 50,000 years, to some of the earliest modern humans who ever set foot in this region. Not invaders, not migrants, but founders. And while the world changed above them, through floods, famines, and falling kingdoms, those lineages survived, not in history books, but in the bodies of Laotian women. But the contrast is sharp, because when you look at the Y-DNA, the male line, you don't see that same wild diversity. It's more uniform, more controlled. Why? Because for thousands of years, Laos practiced patrilocality, where women married out, and men stayed rooted in their birth villages. So while the mothers moved through valleys, over rivers, between ethnic lines, the father's line stood still. It means this: the Laotian genome was shaped by women. The diversity, the movement, the resilience, all of it, carried forward by the ones who were expected to leave, but never let go of what they carried. But now, something is changing. Young women are leaving their villages, not for marriage, but for modern life. And with every departure, one voice in that ancient maternal choir grows a little fainter. As the world changes, will these ancient voices be lost? Or will the blood remember what the world has forgotten? In Laos, memory doesn't live in museums. It breathes through mitochondria. It pulses in the veins of children whose ancestors walked here long before the first kingdom rose. And that's why scientists are looking at Laos not as a margin of history, but as a genetic epicenter. While much of Southeast Asia has been genetically overwritten by Han Chinese expansions, by colonial admixture, by the waves of globalization, Laos holds something different, something older, something intact. Population geneticists from the Genome Asia 100K project have begun mapping the region's deepest genomic layers. And in Laos, they're finding ancestral threads no longer visible in neighboring countries. Segments of archaic Denisovan DNA, particularly in highland ethnic groups like the Hmong and Khmu, have revealed altitude adaptations and immune variants tied to pathogens that vanished millennia ago. Some of these variants appear in only trace levels elsewhere in Southeast Asia, but in Laos, they're still active. A 2021 study led by the University of Copenhagen found rare maternal haplogroups in Laos that may descend from the first wave of Homo sapiens into mainland Southeast Asia. We're not just talking about 4,000 years ago. We're talking 50,000. And then there's the resilience factor. In 2018, researchers at Mahidol University traced hemoglobin E and alpha thalassemia variants across Laotian populations, showing how natural selection reshaped genes to survive malaria, famine, even altitude stress. Laos didn't just preserve its DNA, it weaponized it against extinction. And yet, this living archive is fragile. Urban migration, interethnic marriage, the fading of oral traditions, the decline of village endogamy, all of them are eroding the isolation that once protected these codes. Soon, these threads may dissolve into statistical noise, because Laos doesn't just carry its own genetic story. It carries the last intact blueprint of a region's human past, a Rosetta Stone for Southeast Asia's evolution, diversity, and survival. And if we lose it, we don't just lose a people. We lose the instruction manual to ourselves.